I am sitting with William Mehrvarz, who is a fascinating individual. William, you're from Iran,
I am. I was born there.
and you're from a Muslim family. You grew up in a religious Muslim
A
family.
religious Shia Muslim family, yes.
Wow. And what happened? You became disillusioned with Islam. You secretly started living as a Jew. How did that start?
Right. I was 13 when I first was exposed to the Bible, the whole Old and New Testament. And the New Testament didn't really make sense to me. The Old Testament was more interesting, in particular because of the stories that were similar to the Quran and so on and so forth. So I became more interested in the Old Testament, the Torah, the stories of the Jews, and particularly about Shabbat. That was one thing that was very calming to me, because my Fridays every day I would have to go to, with my father, with my uncle, grandfather, I would go to mass prayers. There would be a very violent speech about current events in the world, death to America, death to Israel, and then burning flags. And I didn't want that. And when I learned about Shabbat, that you sit down, have a nice meal, sing songs, praise God, and so on and so forth, I wanted to achieve that and substitute it in my life.
So you just started doing that on your own?
I did. Eventually, after that
How old were you when you started this?
When I started, I was like around late teens, like 18, 19.
And then you told me that your family discovered that you were living secretly as a Jew, and what happened?
My father figured out that I had already abandoned Islam, or had some thoughts about leaving Islam for something else, and because of his affiliation and connections to the regime, he knew that eventually something's going to come out, and either he's going to get into trouble or I'm going to get into trouble. So he wanted me to stay quiet and shut up about all of this. So he gave me an English Quran instead, but that didn't really interest me.
And when did you come to America then?
Eventually, a lot happened in between, and I found a woman to live with, to marry, so that we could have this secret life together. That she wanted to be more secular as well on her own. She came from a religious family. And eventually that marriage fell apart, as I was living a secret Jew and she was living in secret, but she didn't have a lot of freedom because of her existence. Being a woman is much more difficult. It was much harder for her to live outwardly secular. It was much easier for me.
Wow, but she wasn't really as drawn to Judaism as you were.
No, she didn't want to believe in Islam,
right,
in that sense.
And then you came to the United States and you converted to Judaism.
And yes, exactly. I came to 2016. That's when I moved to New York City and went to a conservative synagogue first, because I didn't know there were different flavors to Judaism.
Welcome to America.
Yep. And I was very much welcomed there. And then eventually, by the end of my conversion process with them, I wanted to seek something higher and more out of Judaism. So I decided to enroll at YU, and I went through a conversion process with the Orthodox Union, with the RCA, Rabbinical Council of America.
Wow. So you have two conversions, one conservative and then the next one Orthodox. And
double Jew.
And and now you're married, thank God. You have two kids.
Yes.
You're living a Torah observant life.
Yeah, very blessed.
It's unbelievable. I mean, do you know anyone else
I don't know any other Iranians now
who've done this?
I'm a gatekeeper, so I don't think people should do this.
And how was your Yeshiva University experience?
It was a wonderful experience. It was exactly what I needed: a community, a loving community, Shabbat observance, joy, Torah, everything all together. Wow. And also an education. I needed that bachelor's degree.
And before we get into the current situation, what's going on in Iran now, and thank you so much for joining us for this.
Of course.
What was it? Was Islam in some way helpful, like sort of leading you onto your Jewish path? Like, could you have discovered Judaism if you hadn't been raised as a Muslim?
That's a very good question. And I think Hashem put all of these things in front of me so that I would end up here. So I would think if I were not born a Muslim, if I were not born in Iran, maybe my interest would not have been piqued into that. So every hardship that I've faced, I believe that Hashem wanted me to face that hardship and challenge so that eventually I could end up where I am.
Wow. So it was all part of the journey.
Right.
And how do you feel about what's going on now in your native country?
I'm torn apart. On one hand, I'm very excited about the prospect of a free Iran. I see these courageous young men and women going out into the streets facing this evil. with bare hands because the government is armed head to toe. And on the other hand, also sad at this loss of life, the
Right.
reports that are coming out. It's devastating.
You have a lot of family still there.
All my family is there, but I haven't really talked to anyone in almost a decade.
Right. You're going back to your personal story.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, your family's still upset with what you've done.
They're not just upset; they're also in denial because they're very observant. They're very aligned with the regime, and now their oldest son is not just an observant Jew. I'm very vocal about being a Zionist, about being a patriot, about being an American, about the so-called great Satan and small Satan, and I support those two. So I think they're in denial in some sense. And how could they not be? They have lived in that. They've believed in that regime for its entire lifespan, 47 years.
I mean, are there Muslims that are protesting against the regime, or it's really the Jews that are not so, observant in Islam that are protesting, or you have both?
I think observance of Islam in Iran has declined, mostly because of the oppression that the regime inflicts on the people. It's not a choice for anyone who was born a Muslim to practice Islam. Especially for women, they don't really have any choice in what kind of clothing they wear. Yeah. And also for men, you don't really have a choice of what you eat, what you wear, what you drink, what you eat, what you study, what you watch. Everything is sanctioned by the regime. Internet is censored. Media is all controlled by the regime. Books are banned. So, as I mentioned in the beginning of the story, when I encountered the Bible, I was not supposed to. Muslims are not allowed to read non-Muslim texts.
How did you find a Bible?
I was at a summer sleepaway camp over the summer, and this was a special camp for individuals whose fathers were either killed or injured in the Iran-Iraq War in the 80s. My father, being one of those individuals who was injured in the war, he lost an arm and a leg. And this Armenian kid also had his father killed in the war, and he was at that sleepaway camp. And we saw each other, and he was reading his Bible, and that really piqued my interest.
Wow.
Like, this is an interesting moment that I'm not supposed to be reading this, but now this guy is my window to this new world.
That's incredible. And tell us how the situation today is different, let's say from the protests, the government violence that you experienced growing up. How was...
Absolutely. For that, I want to take one step back to say, since 1979, when the Islamic Revolution was successful in taking over the country, there have been uprisings. Since I remember, one of those instances was 2009. The Green Revolution was one of the biggest uprisings in my time. And then after that, there were many more, 2017, 2019, and then 2022. All of these uprisings begin by economic demands because the value of the currency goes down, businesses are shut, and then eventually after a few days, the protests lead to anti-regime chants that because the people know these economic issues are rooted in the regime. The regime is causing all those problems. How is this time around different? Well, a couple of reasons. One, it's more violent. Two, it's more widespread. And I think
it's all over the country.
It's all over the country across all 31 provinces to over 120 cities. Most major cities have been in turmoil. And I think people know that this is the end.
You think it's the end?
I think people know that this is the end. They have hope that they are able and capable to overthrow the regime, and this is their chance, as the outside of the country has also supported them in their endeavor.
And who's there ready to take over? Is there anyone ready to take over?
In a traditional sense, this movement does not really have a leader, like the way that 1979 had a leader, with Khomeini being the one. But the former Shah's son, Crown Prince Pahlavi, he has decided that he would want to lead into a transitional government, and he has been outspoken.
And does he have the support of the protesters?
It's very hard to gauge the exact number of it. the previous years, 5 years ago, there was this nonprofit institute that conducted somewhat of a survey of the Iranian people to see who they support in an eventual future government, and he had 35% of their support. So it's not everyone, but it's a significant number. But we can also see in the videos that come out of the country, in the pictures that come out of the country, that people are chanting his name, calling for his return, and they're saying, "Long live the king." So we can see those.
Is there any competition? Is there anyone else in the wings?
No, there's no real leader. Everybody else is either part of the quote-unquote reformist movement who's entrenched within the regime, just wants to transform it to something else so that they can stay in power, or they are a no-name that nobody knows about them.
And I know you're not a representative or an official of the U.S. government or of Israel, but why do you think Israel or America has not done anything yet? And do you think they will?
Before discussing that, I would like to say why they should or why they would do that. And the reason for that is Iran prior to 1979 was a great ally of the United States. The Shah was, as well as Israel. And the region was more peaceful at that time. So it is in our national interest to have a leader inside Iran that is pro-Iran. And in terms of Israel, we have so much history in common. Persia and Israel go thousands of years, and the tomb of Esther and Mordechai is in Hamadan inside.
No, and it's a positive history. It was under Cyrus the Great, the Jewish people were permitted to go back to Israel, rebuild the temple. Haman was not such a good moment, but
he got punished for that.
He got punished, and incredible. I mean, I think most of the people I talk to here, people want to see a change.
You're talking Iranians or Americans?
No, I don't really know Iranians. I mean, I'm saying Americans, and I know Israel. I have a lot of family and son and 2 boys living in Israel now, and
warriors.
Yeah. So, but they this could be a game changer for Israel. Israel's been fighting a 7-front war, and Iran is the head of the snake. You cut off the head of the snake, man. There's no Hezbollah. There's no Hamas. There's no Houthis in Yemen. I mean, it's just like it'll be paradise.
Right. So I think the June events, the 12-day war, was kind of a preamble, and it showed us that Israel is really, really interested in removing Ayatollah Khamenei and the Islamic regime. And I'll touch on that, why I make the kind of distinction or add them together. So with that war, Israel struck Iran, the Islamic Republic, the IRGC leaders, many of them, their bases, missile silos, missile launchers, and their air defenses. So it will be a waste if the U.S. and Israel do not finish the job, as you mentioned, to cut off the head of the snake. And the U.S. was involved in that as well. At the end of the 12-day war, we dropped the bombs on the nuclear facilities. So I think something's in the making. We just, from the outside, we don't see it. The U.S. and Israel are looking into the right window of time. The protests might have shut down right now, might have calmed down, but still, there is a fire simmering beneath the ash. Something's going to be built up again. And going back to the 12-day war, from the images that came from then, people didn't hide and shelter when the bombs were coming because they knew Israel is not targeting them.
Right. Unlike the Iranian ballistic missiles. I was just in Tel Aviv like 2 weeks ago. I passed by a building that took a direct hit. I mean, it was devastating.
Yeah. And I saw one video in Tehran that people were like just sheltering behind cars and so on and so forth. And the cameraman was saying like, don't worry, they're not targeting us. It's the RGC base down the alley.
Yeah.
So I think people know who the real enemy is. And if and when the bombs start falling in Tehran and other cities, targeting IRGC bases, besiege bases, which is a branch of IRGC, that are oppressing the Iranian people, the Iranian people would march into the streets.
Wow. I'm just, I got nervous, to be honest, without getting too political, but I got nervous that I was happy that Iran called off some of the hangings some of the executions that they were saying were going to happen because the United States threatened to go in. And then wondering, oh, did that mean that we just got placated and that we're not going to take advantage of this unique opportunity? Because I've seen all these protests unfold over the years. There's nothing like this, at least from what I'm seeing, what's coming up on my Instagram reels. This looks like really widespread, and what an opportunity for Israel and America to finish the job. But I guess other people are telling me, well, they'll finish the job, but then who's taking over? It could be a worst. Is it possible that Ayatollah Khomeini, that the Muslim clerics in charge could be toppled, and some other guys from the Muslim world could take their place?
You're touching on a really good point, and this has been a point of discussion for the past at least 10 years or 20 years, a couple of decades, because there was no transitional plan in place after Khamenei. He has a son. He's the oldest son, Moshtaba, but he doesn't really have that interest. He doesn't have that public of a figure. Nobody knows where he is, what he does. So the transitional plan was never clear to anyone. It is the fear of the Iranian people inside Iran that if and when the regime falls, either an individual, either from his family or from within the IRGC, takes over the whole country, quote unquote, reforms it or transforms it into something else that is still oppressive, but it just moots all the issues that the U.S. wants it to be moot. So no longer a nuclear threat, no longer a ballistic missile threat, but still an oppressive regime that holds on to power. And the other possibility is that, as you mentioned, a council.
And by the way, and I can see the rest of the world being okay with that.
Right,
because
exactly.
they're not bothering anybody else. We don't have any threats coming from Iran. But
and the EU can buy oil. EU can still trade. They're going to be fine with it. They don't care about the human rights issues now. Why would they care about the human rights issues?
Right, but then you leave the Iranian people stuck.
Correct. So the second possibility is the council, as you mentioned yourself. IRGC is not a very typical like Hezbollah. The 12-day war, we knocked out Hamas. We got Sinwar, and then with Hezbollah, we also got the head, Nasrallah, and then we believe that it's done because they're not as entrenched within the economy of their host countries, being the Palestinian Authority and Lebanon. But in Iran, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, is extremely stretched out within the country, and it has its hand in oil, cyber, technology, everything you can think of. And this was the plan. I remember 20 years ago, they decided to, quote unquote, privatize to satisfy some of the EU countries that, okay, the government doesn't own this. But these are really shell companies owned by the IRGC that are now controlling all these entities. So that's another fear.
Right. Wow. Just going back to your personal story.
Sure.
Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Flip-flap. When you became disillusioned with Islam, why didn't you become Christian?
I get that question a lot, and I think it all comes down to the Old and New Testament. I didn't really have any similar stories from my upbringing, the Quran, and the New Testament. Of course, Jesus might have been mentioned in the Quran, but the stories in and of themselves are not really aligned with the Quran. But the Old Testament, on the other hand, has a lot of the story of creation, the story of the flood, and the story of the Akedah, of course. So those existed, so I became more interested in that. But they had minor differences, and that piqued my interest even more.
Interesting.
So this is an older book. It came before the Quran, and it has some differences. So what could it be? Which one could be true? Right. Which one is emet?
I remember when I was a kid, my dad of blessed memory was an immigration lawyer. And he had a client who was an artist, and he came home with a sketch. And I looked at it. It was like, oh, Akedat Yitzchak, it's the binding of Isaac. But the artist who sketched it wrote the binding of Ishmael.
Wow.
Because he was Muslim. And I learned for the first time that the Quran has actually a version of the Akedat Yitzchak story, but it's Ishmael brought on the altar, not Isaac, which I just thought was...
it's because the hero of that story goes on to inherit the land and become God's nation.
Right.
So they would have to plagiarize it to claim that they are God's nation.
So interesting. And why do you think it's such a draw? I mean, Islam is the fastest growing religion.
It's also the fastest religion that people get out of it.
Well, I mean, you're a good representative of that.
The ex-Muslim community is a large community.
It is. But I mean, just why do you think people in the West are attracted to it? Because they are gaining adherents in the West.
I recently attended the Jewish Leadership Conference, and the conversations in that conference were surrounded by the Bible and how in the United States we have unfortunately moved away from the Bible. And we're talking about both Old and New Testament, because in the past, during Abraham Lincoln's time, for example, there was no separation necessarily of the two. Abraham Lincoln makes a lot of speeches.
Yes,
and in
he
speeches
does.
he touches on Old Testament texts. So I think that departure from, to call it scripture, caused this void that now Islam is now trying to shove itself in and fill the void and say, I'm going to offer you this paradise, this amazing thing that is going to resonate with some folks on the right. And then on the left, Islam is going to offer them, as Khomeini actually literally called it, social justice.
Oh.
And we're going to offer you this so you can be blessed and you can have a future and so on and so forth.
And I guess this is a crazy question. I don't expect you to have a... How does a person with a beard who is, portraying themselves as a very religious person, justify doing the things that they do? They just think because, like I've heard women have been raped, and I hear people are just picked up and hung, and there's no due process, there's no fairness, there's no kindness. And this is somehow all legitimized based on Islam. Like, how do they save face? How do they continue to put themselves out as spiritual leaders and live as such barbarians? October 7th and the like.
It's hard for me to wrap my head around it as well, because I moved away from that. It really turned me off. I did not want that at all. But I think it starts with dehumanization. They truly believe that Islam, in and of itself, believes it's a superior religion. They claim that Islam is the last religion, so on and so forth, and their prophet is the final prophet, and there's nothing beyond it. Everyone at the end of times would have to convert to Islam, would have to either accept it by the sword or accept the book.
Mm-hmm.
So it is an deeply ideological thing to them. Now, how do they internally as humans do it? I don't know.
I mean, because it's a far cry. I think Judaism also views itself as a more authentic religion than Christianity and Islam.
Mm-hmm.
But you never see a Jew attacking any Arab, Muslim, innocent. It doesn't happen. And I don't get how... I understand that they have this superiority complex. I get that. But how do you go from thinking you're right, everybody else is wrong, to justifying... immoral sexual behavior and other kinds of things that we saw on October 7th in the name of Islam, or the things that they're doing to the Iranian people, just shooting demonstrators in the street?
I think in part it's because of the regime itself. When there is an authority above the individuals that orders them to do this, that sanctions all these actions, then people become either numb to what they're doing, or they say, okay, I'm receiving orders. I have to follow these orders. They are coming from this religious authority, this government authority. They have to be true. So that's probably how they're justifying it. The individuals themselves are justifying shooting protesters dead in the face. I've seen videos of protesters being shot when they were injured. They went to the hospital, and then the authorities came to the hospital and shot them in the hospital. It's horrific. And you are correct to equate it to the October 7th, because the images we see coming out of Iran are very similar to what happened on October 7th. You see jihadis on pickup trucks with AK-47s in both images, and it's indistinguishable except for the fact that one is in Iran, one was in Israel.
Right, and this is going to be a difficult question. I'm just thinking, can you make a distinction, I would imagine, between jihadist Islam and non-jihadist Islam? Like, do you, or is the whole religion just so anti-Semitic, anti-West?
I think you mentioned it's a very hard question for me to answer. I have been detached from it by choice because I believe that the religion has an issue within its core that is not just anti-Semitic, not just anti-West, but also anti-human. They don't want any other human being to be any different, to be different than themselves. They want everyone to be Muslim, and this issue persists across denominations.
Mm-hmm.
Shia Muslims want everyone to be Shia Muslim. Sunni Muslims want everyone to be Sunni Muslim. So they have issue with each other. Within those sects, you have the same problem. There are some Shias within Iran that are persecuted because they're not the right kind of Shia Islam.
Right.
So I think Islam in and of itself has some issue
So it's
and
not
they
just
need some
jihadi.
reckoning. Right. The jihadis are just the ones that act upon it. And it's
So if
proportionally
I brought a moderate Islam on this podcast, a moderate Islamic cleric, an imam, that's what I meant.
Okay.
He would tell me this.
I would ask them maybe 2-3 questions to see where they stand on those 3 issues, and then from there, from my personal perspective, from there I would decide my relationship with them. First issue would be apostates. They could drink alcohol. They could be going out with women before marriage. They could not say prayers. They could not fast. But as soon as you ask them, okay, William has converted from Islam to just say atheism. He doesn't believe in anything now. Is it okay? If this individual says, oh, of course, it's totally fine. Why would it not be? Then that's fine. That's a check. But if they say that, but why would you convert out of Islam? Islam, the religion of peace, and so on and so forth. So that's a red flag. And the second one would be Israel. Does Israel have the right to exist as a Jewish state? And if they say no and then bring up some sources from either the Quran, Hadith, or so on and so forth, pull the religion in, you can see where they stand deeply inside. And then last one would be just
because I'm just wondering why we hear nothing from. I mean, I don't hear much. Do you hear much from, let's say, Muslim clerics, imams, peaceful imams? There are a lot of peaceful Muslims in the world. I know some peaceful Muslims. Some of them I would call friends, colleagues. Like, why don't we hear when something barbaric takes place in the name of Islam? I would, as a rabbi, if God forbid that happened in the name of Judaism, I would try as best as I can to tell the world that's not what the Torah teaches. That's not what I believe.
You would denounce that act.
You would denounce it, and you would try to distance yourself from it.
So I think it comes down to that authority.
I mean, are they just afraid? No, those people, maybe are there moderate Islamists, clerics, imams, who believe it's wrong, who don't believe it's, authentic, Islam, but they're just afraid? Is that it? Or no, deep down?
I think the problem is with the authority. There is no opposition to Islam's authority. Even in the West, I'm talking about authority as like Islamic authority. In the Islamic Republic of Iran, you have the government that is the authority that has Islam. Same with Saudi Arabia, say, and then Pakistan and Egypt. But in the U.S., the authority would be that imam. There is no coherent reform movement within Islam. There is one particular, they call themselves Muslims for Freedom and Democracy, I believe. There's one particular movement that denounces jihad. So one of the pillars of Islam denounces one and says this does not mean what it has traditionally meant, and we have to live in the 21st century and so on and so forth. But they don't have authority. Nobody listens to them. So maybe that's why Muslims... Are they
a sizable group?
No, they're very, very small. I think the leadership is a handful of people.
Right. Whoa. One last question. Having lived under a regime that repressed Jews, do you worry about us here in America, our new mayor? Do you think Jews will soon have to fight for their lives here too?
I think it's very different in the U.S., mostly because of what a blessing it is, this country. So we have the separation of power. Even within New York City where we live, we have the separation of power and we have these term limits. Yes, the current mayor might be able to cause a lot of damage in a sense, but long term he doesn't have that much power in that sense. So I'm not too scared as so many others are. And also, on the other hand, I believe that we need to fight. we can't just flee. This is the United States of America. We cannot abandon ship, because if we do, where else do we go? Maybe Elon Musk sends us to the moon. I don't know.
No, I mean, obviously we would go to Israel, but
how can we protect Israel if the U.S., God forbid, if the U.S. falls?
Well, I don't know. I used to feel that way, to be perfectly honest, and I'm a big American patriot. I love this country. Both my grandparents came here as immigrants from other fleeing, anti-Semitism, one from Russia, one from Germany. And I believe in the American dream. Our family is a product of the American dream, as a lot of Jewish families are. But I don't know. I heard Netanyahu announce that within 10 years, Israel wants to become independent of the United States financially. And it's not an unrealistic goal, because the $4 or $5 billion that Israel gets from America every year, which is incredibly important, is spent here in the United States. And a lot of the technology is Israel.
We build Jewish, it ourselves, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not an unrealistic thing. And if you look at the Hamas war, what happened, Israel's hand was stayed, even by the greatest, whether you like Trump or not, he's hands down the most pro-Israel, most supportive of Israel president the Jewish people have ever had. But even with, he's only got 3 more years left. Contrary to what most people think, he's not going to be in the 3rd term. Okay, there'll be somebody else. And as the Torah says in last week's Parsha, Vayakam melech hadash shelo yadat Yosef, and a new king arose who did not know Joseph. You could end up having, a Vance, the vice president, who's more of an isolationist than the president is, and doesn't care about Israel as much, let's say, as Trump does, and really puts Israel in a very, very difficult position with her neighbors, which is what happened previously. This October 7th attack took place because Israel never finished the job in all of the other incursions into Gaza. And why was that? Was it entirely because the U.S. stayed their hand? Primarily, you ask most, people, it's primarily because America, pressured Israel. So Jonathan Conriquez, who is someone I interviewed on this podcast, he believes that the relationship between the United States and Israel is important on one hand. You can't say it's not important. On the other hand, is somewhat detrimental to Israel's interests sometimes. So I'm wondering, just like, I don't know, I'm playing devil's advocate a little. I'm here. I live here. I love this country. But do you think we're going down, Mandami's just the beginning? Do you think there could be more and more and more? Not that we'd ever have an Islamist government coming in, but you have more Muslims moving here. You have neighborhoods where Sharia law is now being practiced. You have more members of Congress. The Democratic Party has fallen prey to a lot of these influences. You still don't think it could happen here?
I think you have a legitimate
I'm being a little.
No, but the problem may not be Mamdani himself. As you mentioned, the problem might be what comes next.
Yeah.
So Mamdani has been endorsed by certain individuals, and Mamdani has endorsed certain individuals. So those individuals might be groomed, might be put on a pedestal so that they can run for office in the future, and then we would go down this spiral. But going back to what you mentioned about Bibi Netanyahu mentioning that in 10 years or within the 10-year lifespan, we want to become more independent and not dependent on the U.S., then the more so it's on us to make sure that there are no outside threats outside the U.S., meaning that the head of the snake, being the Islamic Republic of Iran, should be eliminated so that our focus, Israel's focus, could be on protecting the United States as it goes down that spiral. The U.S. has protected the state of Israel for the past 70 plus years since its inception. So the roles would be reversed, and we would be the
Well, I don't know. I don't know if I would take a little issue with that characterization.
Okay.
I think the United States has worked with Israel to help her be protected. I think at the end of the day, Israel's basically protected itself. If you look at all the wars Israel has had to fight, she's basically done them on her own. There's no question that U.S. arms have been helpful, U.S. aid, and especially in the 1973 Yom Kippur War, the United States. But 67 is a great example. You know, you read Michael Oren's 6 Days of War. The CIA communicated directly to the Mossad that if Israel shoots the first bullet against the 465,000 troops that had amassed on her borders that were about to attack, and the only chance Israel had was the element of surprise, that if Israel exercised that, America would not come to her defense. So there are many instances where Israel had to go at this alone.
It was a complicated relationship.
Yeah. Like, listen, families, and families have complicated relationships. But whatever, I was taking a little issue just with the characterization.
The way I see myself, and my wife and I go head to head with this one, she sees herself as an American Jew because she sees her Judaism first and her Americanism is secondary to that. I see it differently. I see myself.
So she calls herself a Jewish American or
Jewish American.
A Jewish American.
So
Yeah.
I call myself an American Jew because I believe America gives me my Judaism because I didn't have freedom of religion.
Wow.
Coming to the U.S. gives me the freedom. So without the United States, I won't have the freedom to be Jewish.
Wow.
So
now you'd have that freedom if you made Aliyah, obviously.
That's true. Absolutely.
But you didn't. You came here, and America gives you that freedom. And that's why traditionally this has been the greatest diaspora country that the Jewish people have ever known.
Half of the Jews live here and not in the U.S.
Right.
In Israel, I mean.
One last question. I know I said that before, but that's what rabbis
totally
always
fine.
give false promises, especially when they're giving speeches. What do you most love about Judaism? I mean, you clearly fell in love with Judaism. You chose to be Jewish from, and maybe you were a little rebellious as a teenager against Islam for good reason, but you've stuck with it. And and the conservative conversion apparently wasn't sufficient. You wanted to get an Orthodox conversion. What do you love about Yiddishkeit so much that you would, first of all, alienate your family, leave your origin, your native country, come to another country so you could practice your Judaism freely, go to Yeshiva University. It's an Orthodox institution. It's my alma mater. I love it, but could be an intense place. And now you're living as a Torah observant Jew. What is it that you fell in love with and that keeps you inspired?
I want to make a comment about the conservative conversion. I don't think it was not sufficient. I just believe that the Orthodox community was better equipped to give me what I needed, and that's what I enjoyed about Judaism most. And that was the communal aspect of it. I loved the fact that on Shabbat, I could reset, I could just unplug and just relax, forget about everything. Most especially because when I moved to the States, I cut all ties from my family. My father is in, because of his connections to the regime, he's in real estate. He is very affluent and wealthy. So I grew up comfortable, but I lost that privilege when I showed him my interest, that I'm not interested in being Muslim. So he didn't trust me in that sense. So I left all of that behind and then came to this country, poor and penniless, lived in homeless shelters, and was in this conservative synagogue. And I couldn't go and enjoy Shabbat. There was no community in that sense. I couldn't spend Rosh Hashanah to be observant during Rosh Hashanah. There were Rosh Hashanah meals, but then I would have to take the subway back. And I wanted something more. When I mentioned in the beginning that more was, I wanted to just immerse myself into this loving, kind religion that sits down on a Friday night, unplugs, so that I can remind myself that, in my chaotic moments when I moved to this country, I always had Shabbat to sit down and say, okay, I am homeless. I don't have money. I don't have a lot of things to look forward to, but I have Shabbat to look forward to.
Wow.
I can relax.
Wow.
And I think Shabbat is the thing that I enjoy the most out of Judaism. And I love the fact that spending time with them.
It's still your favorite mitzvah.
Absolutely, yes. So I love the fact that at MJE, we spent Shabbat together. And then at the end, after we said Havdalah, it said 6 more days to Shabbat, 6 more to Shabbat. I love that. It's amazing.
It's one of our favorite songs.
I love it.
Wow. Thank you so much, William. And
thank you for having me.
I want to leave you with a blessing that Hashem should continue to give you the strength to speak up and to live as a proud Jew here in the United States.
Amen.
And you should have continued nachas from your beautiful children. And thank you so much for gracing us with your presence and being so open and honest. And I will tell you, as somebody who left another religion and left his family behind that we're very, very proud to have you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure being here. Thanks for having me. With the hope for a free Iran, here's Hatikva in Persian. آرزوهای من میرویی هر جا که میتپد جان یهودی میکشد پیش ما را به سوی خاور چشمان را سوی سیون سوی بهبودی رفته امید هرگز از دیار امید 2000 سال هم پیمان مردمی آزاده در دیار خود اورشلیم سیون سرزمین ما مردمی آزاده در دیار خود اورشلیم سیون سرزمین ما